During the spoken meditation, you heard the Taoist story of the master carver who crafted a wooden bell stand for a prince, and that bell stand was so perfect that all who saw it thought this must be the work of supernatural spirits, not of mere human hands. But the master carver shared that his art was the result of practicing what the Taoist masters called Wu Wei, non-action, effortlessness, non-interference, non-intervention. From a meditative state of calm, centered equanimity, of mental calmness, composure, evenness of temper. You can hear that word equal in the word equanimity. That evenness of temper, even in a difficult situation. A high-pressure situation like a prince has ordered you to produce a piece of art. That master carver waited patiently for the right tree, for the right timing, and for the right movements to align. In the words of the story, I went to the forest to see the trees in their own natural state. And when the right tree appeared before my eyes, the bell stand also appeared in it, clearly beyond doubt. All I had to do was put forth my hand and begin. If I had not met this particular tree, there would have been no bell stand. My own collected thought encountered the hidden potential in the wood, and from this live encounter came the work. This ancient tale of doing one thing extraordinarily well at the intersection of your gifts and the needs of the world, to work with focus, with grace, with a deep connection to nature, is a potential source of wisdom for us today in our crazy, busy world of technological distraction. Taoism reminds us that there are other ways of being in the world that can help us find balance and order amidst the chaos. As the bumper sticker wisdom goes, Taoism says to us, don't just do something, sit there. Just doing something, anything, is the opposite of Wu Wei, the opposite of non-action. And it invites us to practice effortlessness, non-intervention, non-interference. Taoism invites us to consider if the most radical act we could do sometimes, and we think of radicalism as we're breaking something. It's about revolution, right? It's about, huge change. The Taoism invites us to consider if the most radical act we might do sometimes to really get at the root of things and really make a difference is paradoxically just to sit there and do nothing until the timing is right. As you asked to reflect upon in the spoken meditation, is there a time in your life when you took the risk of stepping back and trusting others, and because you didn't try to micromanage the process, the outcome was a beautifully surprising result that turned out in a way that you completely could not have anticipated and likely would have blocked from happening if you had said it has to be this way, the only way you could conceive of it as being? I'd be interested to hear later if specific stories have come to mind that you would be comfortable sharing. Personally, I experience this all the time here as your minister. First of all, it would be far beyond my capacity to even try and control the 10,000 amazing things that are happening all the time in and around and through this congregation. Social justice work, art shows, spirituality groups, music, discussion groups, and so much more. There's a sense in which my role as minister is to be a centering presence, a ballast amidst all of that activity. But trying to micromanage those 10,000 things would not only be impossible, but would also undermine our collective flourishing and all that is possible that can happen here. Along these lines, I've read many books by the contemporary Buddhist teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, but the most challenging to me was his book, Nothing to Do, Nowhere to Go. Because that's not how I feel. I don't feel like I have nothing to do and nowhere to go. The subtitle is Waking Up to Who You Are. And reflecting on the teachings of the 9th century Zen Buddhist master, Linji, Han invites us to consider if we might sometimes be inhibiting our spiritual growth if we're always just doing something. even if that something is seeking spiritual teachers, visiting retreat centers, reading spiritual books. Han writes, if you're doing all those things, you will not be equal to the person who has nothing to do when he or she enters the temple and sits down in the lotus position. Ironically, even spiritual activities, just doing something, even if it's spiritual, can itself be a distraction from, as the subtitle goes, waking up to who we really are, being fully present to ourselves in the present moment. Instead, no matter where you are, learning to just sit may be the most transformative practice of all. To just sit and be with ourselves and with the present moment and the world around us as it is. Han writes, the Zen master Lin Ji's term for such a practitioner is a businessless person. A businessless person. Someone who doesn't have any business, who doesn't have anything to do, anywhere to go. What a radical aspiration in our time of mass overcommitment, when there are so many books and articles and seminars on time management, to say, I don't need to manage my time. I'm a businessless person. I just want to sit here and be. And since I've been using some analogies from Zen Buddhism, I should say that there really are some similarities between Buddhism and Taoism. They come out of a similar, related, ancient Chinese philosophical context. But there are also significant differences as well. So allow me to turn now to a more direct focus on the most significant Taoist text, the Daodejing. How many of you have read the Daodejing or parts of it? Okay, quite a few of you. Regarding the spelling of that book, you can see some alternative spellings in the sermon title in your order of service. Some of you will recall a sermon I preached back in January on the Yi Jing. Some of you may be more familiar with it as the I Ching, spelled capital I space C-H-I-N-G. But in basically all these cases, all of this would be easier if we all spoke Chinese. Anyone speak Chinese? Right, Chinese? Okay, I don't either. It's a very difficult language to learn if you're a native English speaker. But since most of us do not speak Chinese, some confusion arises because we're in the midst of a shift. It's really common now in the academy, and it's slowly trickling down to the rest of us from what's known as the Wade-Giles transliteration system, which comes out of British colonialism. So it was British people going in and saying, here's how we should translate Chinese into English. And now we're moving to the Pinyin system, which is Chinese people saying, this is how we think you should translate Chinese into English. So that's why you used to have these really confusing things, right? Like, it's pronounced I Ching, but it's spelled capital I-C-H-I-N-G, which looks like I Ching. So it used to say, you know, it's pronounced the Daodejing, but we're going to spell it with a T, right? T-A-O-T-E. So like, that's really confusing, right? So that's what the Pinyin system is all about. But it's really making marketers anxious, because when they put things like D-A-O-D-O, D-E-J-I-N-G, people are like, what book is that? I'm looking for the Daodejing, right? And not so. We're slowly starting to catch up with the Pinyin system. And if you're curious to learn more about the Daodejing, the best accessible Taoism scholar I've found recently is named Hans-Georg Müller. He's a German, but he's teaching in Canada now. He has his own translation and commentary on the Daodejing, or if you're interested in the secondary literature, he's got a book called The Philosophy of the Daodejing. It was published in 2006 with Columbia University Press. So those are two starting points. If you're curious about how to spell his name, it'll all be in the manuscript version of the sermon that will go on our website. And according to Müller and other contemporary scholars of Taoism, the text that we know as the Daodejing was not, as traditionally said, was not written by one person, traditionally by Lao Tzu, which we now spell L-A-O-Z-E, Lao Tzu. This is all kind of confusing, right, as we move into this new system. But it was not written by one person. In all likelihood, it's an anthology of wise sayings. As you read through the Daodejing, you're seeing an anthology of wise sayings from ancient China that came from many different sources in many different places. And they were originally intended and written by and for the intellectual elite of ancient China. And the earliest texts were maybe around 2,500 years ago. And those oral traditions began to be written down around 300 BCE. So about 300 years before the historical Jesus, about a century and a half after Socrates. And at first, this anthology was actually called the Lao Tzu, after Lao Tzu, who it was traditionally ascribed to. But later, during China's Han Dynasty, it became known as the Daodejing, which is a combination of three Chinese words. So Daodejing, or you could think of it as the Jing, about the Tao and the day. So Jing means classical scripture, Tao means way, and day means power or efficiency. So it's the Jing, the classical scripture, about the Tao, about the way, the process of being in the world, and the day, the most efficient way, the most powerful way of doing that, which Wu Wei says is actually, paradoxically, the way of non-action, the way of non-intervention. And originally, the wisdom sayings that became the Daodejing were likely memorized by that ancient elite Chinese class that had the leisure time to memorize it. So it can be a little weird when you read it now because it can seem repetitive, it can seem it's not really in the order. But if you actually were memorizing the whole thing, it's helpful for it to be repetitive, and it's helpful, and the order doesn't really matter because you have the whole thing memorized and you know it by heart. And it was, I could perhaps also say, I think this is maybe the most common misunderstanding about the Daodejing. People would say, okay, so everyone is just supposed to not act and not intervene. Actually, no. This was a very elitist text. Only really the Taoist sage ruler and those who aspired to be a Taoist sage ruler were supposed to act with non-intervention, with non-action. So when some people, I'll occasionally meet people who say, you know, I'm trying to practice Taoism in every aspect of my life and just, you know, totally choose non-action. And I always kind of want to say, and I don't, but I always want to say, oh, so you inherited an ancient Chinese kingdom that you're the ruler of. Because it'll work out great if that's the case. But if it's not, it's a little more complicated than that. So consider, for example, this stanza from chapter 20 of the Daodejing. What simplicity! The ordinary people are shining. I alone, the ruler, seem to be hidden. The ordinary people are distinct. I alone, the ruler, am undifferentiated. My desires alone are different from other people, and I esteem the nurturing mother. That's not exactly a rousing endorsement of our UU fifth principle that calls us to use democracy in society and in our congregations. But it's a good reminder that the way of being in the world outlined in the Daodejing was not intended to be universal for all people in all times and all places. But there might still be some wisdom in it for us amidst our crazy, busy world that's almost the opposite of Wu Wei. For the Daodejing, the best leader from a Taoist perspective is that ideal we saw earlier in Thich Nhat Hanh of the businessless person, someone who, like the woodcarver, operates from a place of centeredness, of calm, of equanimity, who is the living embodiment of non-action, of non-intervention, of a non-interference. And the paradoxical promise of such a leader is that having emptiness at the center will give the people permission to rise in and fill in what needs to be done instead of having everything be top down. Chapter 57 of the Tao says it this way: I don't act. The people change themselves. I love stillness, and the people correct themselves. I am without task, and the people prosper by themselves. It makes me think a little bit of that line from History of the World, Part 1 with Mel Brooks, it's good to be the king, right? Like that's what, it's awfully convenient, right? To me, it sounds a little bit like libertarianism meets paradoxical mysticism, but there may be some truth in it. I do think, indeed, that there is some truth here for refraining from micromanaging people and processes who might well prosper better if left to their own natural rhythms, devices, timing, and inclinations, rather than us trying to always force our way of doing things onto them. And although there's much more to say about the Daodejing, I'd like to make one important final point about the ways that the Taoist perspective is deeply resonant with our UU seventh principle of the interdependent web of all existence. The worldview of the Daodejing reminds us that all of us humans, whether sage rulers or just us common folk, are merely one part of the massive whole cosmos. We humans are not special in the grand scheme of things, so we should be cautious about over-interpreting what happens to us as oh, some good thing happened to us, so that must be some ultimate good. I must have done something good to deserve this. Or if something bad happens to you, oh, that must be my fault. From a Taoist point of view, all that happens is part of a very complex tapestry and a larger whole. And we may or may not have the capacity from our finite human perspective to understand, why did this happen to me, either good or bad? As it says in chapter 58 of the Daodejing, it is upon bad luck that good luck depends. It is upon good luck that bad luck depends. Or one man's terrorist is another's freedom fighter. There's a lot of ways you can say this. But perhaps this view is better exemplified in this ancient Taoist tale. There was an old man at a frontier fort in the north of China who understood Taoism. One day, he lost his horse, which wandered over into the land of the Hu tribesmen. His neighbors came to condole with him, and the man said, "How do you know that this is bad luck, that I lost my horse?" After a few months, that horse returned with some fine horses from the Hu tribesmen coming alongside it. And the people congratulated the man, and the old man said, "How do you know that it's good luck that I now have so many fine horses?" He became very prosperous with all those horses. But then his son one day broke his leg riding one of those fine horses. And all the people came to condole with him again. And the old man said, "How do you know that this is bad luck, that my son broke his leg riding one of these horses?" And one day, those Hu tribesmen invaded that frontier fort where the old man and his neighbors lived. And all the young men fought with arrows to defend the fort, and 9/10 of those young men were killed. Both father and son escaped unharmed, because the son had a broken leg and could not fight. Therefore, good luck changes into bad, and bad luck changes into good. And according to the Daodejing, it cannot be known by us from our finite human perspective where their altering ends. And so we find ourselves returning to one of the central characteristics of the Taoist master: equanimity, mental calmness, composure, evenness of temper, even in a difficult situation. Whatever happens to us is never just about us individually, or even just about us collectively as humans in the larger humanity. We are part of the larger whole of nature, of the cosmos. What wisdom, then, might the Daodejing hold for you in your life? Are there situations you're in that might be best served by choosing non-action, non-interference, non-intervention? Might there be, what might it feel like to experiment with occasionally being a businessless person? Not with time management, but just sitting there with nothing to do and nowhere to go. Or might you, like the woodcarver, be well served by waiting patiently for the right time and the right place to act with effortless precision? Or does the story of the old man at the frontier fort invite you to consider if perhaps some of what is going on in your life right now, whether seemingly good or bad, is actually not about you, but just part of some larger whole of the nature